to a heliocentric understanding of the universe.
So now he's getting into martial arts. Anyway, I'm not here to bash Jeff, I promise. Never will you ever hear Jeff. And like I said, I'm not picking on Jeff. I'm just pointing interesting things out, like he points interesting things out about the Book of Mormon, but never will you hear him ever go, I've had this enlightening moment from, I felt the Spirit from the Book of Mormon as I've read this. Or I feel really great about this. I love how the Book of Mormon says this. I love what I felt in General Conference. It's always going to be words like.
So this is going to be a deal breaker for someone like me reading the Book of Mormon.
It's always a deal breaker. Everything he reads, anything he comes across, he's never going to tell us that he feels sanctified, edified, that this could possibly be true. You're never going to hear language like that from Jeff, okay? It's always going to be words like deal breaker. Y'all are excited about Jeff. Jeff's never going to get excited back. He's never going to give you what you want. I'm not even talking about conversion. He's never even going to tell you, hey, I don't believe in the Book of Mormon, but I love the references to Christ. I love that it talks about baptism. I love that it brings people to Christ.
So in verse 15 here, there's essentially a scientific statement being made that points to...
I just love Jeff. I love his music. I love his haircut. And he doesn't miss... I've never seen his hair grow. The dude keeps his hair spit spot shiny short, and that's beautiful. I'm not making fun of it.
To a heliocentric understanding of the universe.
So now he's getting into martial arts. Anyway, I'm not here to bash Jeff, I promise. Jeff is Jeff, and he's gaining momentum, and he's going to soar no matter what little old me says, right? I personally don't know why, though, okay? And we're just visiting Jeff. I'm going to call this visiting Jeff, and maybe we'll visit Jeff once in a while. I don't know why, because Latter-day Saints are still getting excited about him reading things, yet he doesn't get excited back. He's always pointing out how excited these saints get.
So this brings me to the end of Helaman, and the stage is set for 3rd Nephi, which I'm excited to read.
You sure about that? You sure about that?
Only because there have been so many Latter-day Saints that have explained to me that 3rd Nephi is sort of the crown jewel of the Book of Mormon, and some really important things are about to happen. But between now and then, I'm going to be releasing other videos, which is why it would be awesome if you would like this video and subscribe.
And they're always saying the same thing. Wait till you read this, Jeff. Or, Jeff, you got to read it like this. Or,
pray about it, Jeff.
Like Jeff's just going to miraculously exclaim that he feels the Holy Ghost and he wants to join the church. I don't think that's going to happen. I've said before in the past, and I'm not here to rattle his chains. I'm not here to make you guys upset for some of you who are fans of Jeff. But remember, don't you first have to just remember this. You have to have a sincere heart with real intent. Having faith in Christ. Is Jeff doing this with a sincere heart? And is he doing this with real intent? Let's visit Jeff. There's only a few parts that I want to visit with this. This is a recent video. Pastor reads Helaman from the Book of Mormon. So he's already read Alma. He's already into Helaman, right? And he says he's read Helaman. Jeff does not have endearing language. He doesn't have endearing language. He speaks with disdain, and he always alludes to something. He's always playing, it's always done in a passive-aggressive manner, okay? Never will you ever hear Jeff, and like I said, I'm not picking on Jeff. I'm just pointing interesting things out, like he points interesting things out about the Book of Mormon, but never will you hear him ever go, I've had this enlightening moment from, I felt the Spirit from the Book of Mormon as I've read this. Or I feel really great about this. I love how the Book of Mormon says this. I love what I felt in General Conference. It's always going to be words like.
So this is going to be a deal breaker for someone like me reading the
It's
book of
always a deal breaker. Everything he reads, anything he comes across, he's never going to tell us that he feels sanctified, edified, that this could possibly be true. You're never going to hear language like that from Jeff, okay? It's always going to be words like deal breaker, just stuff like that. So let's get to the parts that I was
talking about here.
But what I have seen in the Book of Mormon is anytime there is peace, whether it's with the Nephites and the Lamanites or the Nephites and the Lamanites, eventually wickedness creeps in. Chapter 6 describes that there's so much prosperity and so many of the people in the land are doing well and even getting rich that wickedness creeps in and Satan actually begins to introduce thoughts and ideas that are injurious to the people. And I don't really know how to make sense of what's being said here in
now
chapter.
pay attention to what he says. I don't really know how to make sense of what's going on here. That's what he says, right? Let me play it again.
Begins to introduce thoughts and ideas that are injurious to the people. And I don't really know how to make sense of what's being said here.
How do you not make sense of what's being said here? And I'll show you what I'm talking about. You don't have to know the Book of Mormon. He's a very smart guy. He's got a college degree. He understands what the word oath means, and he understands what the word covenant means. Here we go.
Chapter 6, but I'll just observe that there's even a reference to secret oaths and covenants from Satan that are darkening the hearts of individuals. I see this in verse 26 and 30. I'm not sure what that's referring to because I know that oaths and covenants and some of those things
I'm
are...
not sure what that's referring to. If you read the verse, even Andrea was sitting there with me and goes, how does he not know what this means? It's very plain and simple. The Book of Mormon is written plainly and simply, for many people have picked up the Book of Mormon, been converted to the gospel, and have understood the plain and simple words of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Joseph Smith said that the Book of Mormon was the most correct book on earth. And not only that, it's probably one of the plainest books to read, even more so than the Bible. But here we go.
Part of temple ordinances, but clearly I don't think that's what this is referring to, but I don't...
So this is alluding. Andrew even said, you notice how he wanted to throw in temple ordinances. How do you get confused with oaths and covenants with Satan and oaths and covenants that we do in the temple? So it almost seems like he had to couple these things together and show that, see, anytime you make oaths and covenants, even in your temples, Latter-day Saints, it is not good. But he acts very confused. So now I'm going to play the whole thing through and just let you watch it. And you'll see the verse that he's pointing out.
That wickedness creeps in and Satan actually begins to introduce thoughts and ideas that are injurious to the people. And I don't really know how to make sense of what's being said here in chapter 6, but I'll just observe that there's even a reference to secret oaths and covenants from Satan that are darkening the hearts of individuals. I see this in verse 26 and 30. I'm not sure what that's referring to because I know that oaths and covenants and some of those things are part of temple ordinances, but clearly I don't think that's what this is referring to, but I don't know what it's referring to, which is why I just observe it.
So let's read the verse together.
I know that oaths and covenants and some of those things are part of temple ordinances, but clearly I don't think that's what this is referring to, but I don't know what it's referring to, which is why I just observe it.
Verse 26, now behold, those secret oaths and covenants did not come forth unto Gadianton from the records which were delivered unto Helaman. So we understand these are oaths and covenants, and he knows that we make oaths and covenants in the temple, which are good. It is plain and simple. It says, those secret oaths and covenants did not come forth unto Gadianton from the records which were delivered unto Helaman.
All right.
But behold, they were put into the heart of Gadianton by that same being who did who did entice our first parents to partake of the forbidden fruit. Okay, so it's talking obviously about Satan making oaths and covenants, but it's just interesting how he had to mention that he was confused there. I don't think he was confused. I think he wanted to allude to the idea that we also make oaths and covenants in our temple. There's nothing confusing there. Okay, so moving on.
If you'll allow me to kind of go off script here for a little bit, there was one
You're
thing
allowed,
that I
Jeff.
saw in chapter 6 that caught my attention. It's super minor, and yet it just prompted a thought in my mind that I'd like to share with you. And it's when all of this piece is being talked about, there's a statement that's made, "Behold, their women did toil and spin, and did make all manner of cloth, and fine twined linen, and cloth of every kind, and clothe their nakedness." So just this reference of women made something pop out in my mind, and that is, there's not a whole lot of women in the Book of Mormon. And that is atypical from what I see in the Old and the New Testaments. The Old Testament is filled with so many prominent women, whether it's Sarah or Rahab or Deborah, or even whenever you...
So Andrea pointed this out. She's like, okay, well, the Bible was recorded in Greek, right? On parchment. Literary works and detailed letters were written on parchment or papyrus. Those short or temporary records were written or scratched on potsherds, ostraka, or wax tablets. Okay? So Andrea points out, and she made a good point, that we're talking about brass plates here. We're talking about metal. And that's the only way that this was recorded. So we didn't have a lot of dialogue. We didn't have a lot of opportunity to record more things. We're scratching on metal the whole time. So not a lot of dialogue, and this was their method of transcription.
You get into the New Testament and you have such a prominent presence of women like Mary and Martha.
And then
even
some would argue with you, Jeff, that even the Bible, those who don't like the Bible or the Book of Mormon will tell you that even the Bible doesn't have enough women in it. So, what's enough, right? I'm just randomly watching this. I don't watch Jeff religiously. I think it's ridiculous, to be honest.
he was carrying out his prophetic office. In fact, in chapter 10, verses 7 through 10, it says, "Behold, I give unto you power, that whatsoever ye shall seal
chapter
on
10,
earth shall be sealed."
This is Helaman chapter 10, verse 7. And we're talking about power. We're talking about priesthood. We're talking about what prophets do, apostles, keys, right? Keys of the priesthood.
In heaven, and whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven, and thus shall ye have power among this people. So on one hand, this just highlights the empowerment that Nephi is receiving as a prophet of God. But I want to touch a little bit more on this idea of what is being bound on.
So the thing I'm trying to point out here, before I point out what he's talking about specifically here and where I see the flaw in what he's saying, is that he's never, y'all are excited about Jeff. Jeff's never going to get excited back. He's never going to give you what you want. I'm not even talking about conversion. He's never even going to tell you, hey, I don't believe in the Book of Mormon, but I love the references to Christ. I love that it talks about baptism. I love that it brings people to Christ. And if you notice his endearing language, he has a lot more deeper, intimate language when he's talking about the Bible, and not the same language when he's talking about the Book of Mormon. He's never going to talk about the central purpose of the Book of Mormon, even if he doesn't believe it. He's not going to admit that it does convince many people that Jesus is the Christ. He's never going to say that he loves that it testifies of Christ, that he adores the idea of it affirming the reality of his life, of Christ's mission and power on earth. He's not going to ever admit that it's somewhat doctrinal. He's never going to talk about the beauties of the atonement of Jesus Christ found in the Book of Mormon, or even that it lays out a plan of salvation. I know that many of you are saying, I don't care if he's converted or not. He's extending an olive branch. He's extending an olive branch with a letter attached to it that invites you to his meetings Saturday night at 7:00. So let's get into this.
Earth is bound in heaven, loose on earth, loose in heaven. In this case, it is spoken about in the context of true power, as the power of his prophetic voice is really being endorsed by God. And clearly this is reminiscent of a couple of portions in the New Testament.
And he's going to talk, notice the difference in his excitement, in his demeanor. Notice the difference in his demeanor, and it changes when he's talking about the Bible.
When Jesus is establishing the church with Peter, and also in chapter 18, when talking about dealing with sin within the church, he says, "Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." I think it's important to sort of point out what is meant by that from a mainstream Christian understanding.
Mainstream Christian understanding. I think it is important to point out what is meant by that from a mainstream Christian perspective. I'm sorry, Jeff, but there are no mainstream Christians. There are how many Christian denominations on the earth? There are how many mainstream Christians on the earth that were brought up even by David Alexander at one time? And how many? Let's see. I don't know. I'm seeing 45,000, but I think David Alexander pointed out even more so today. They don't all agree on that scripture, Jeff, and they don't all agree on many. So when he says from a mainstream Christian's perspective, that doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't at all.
It's not tied so much to having power and authority to do things in an empowered way, as much as it's tied to forgiveness from the good news of the gospel of redemption and being freed from sin.
Okay, so I just kind of want to show you a few things, and it's not to sit here and point out all day what he's saying wrong, but it's basically to point out that he's not really extending an olive branch. What he's doing is he's teaching Latter-day Saints and others what he calls true Christianity. And that's what he's doing. And, you know, some of you don't have a problem with that, but I think that you're wasting your time watching him. But that's just my opinion, I guess.